Welcome to episode 3 of the Composer Spotlight series here on my channel, where I get to talk to really amazing musicians and get to know their work and their personalities behind that work. And I'm really pleased to be joined by Kyle Grimm today. Kyle Grimm is a composer and double bassist whose music has been described as feisty technicolor by Roger Zahab. His compositions strive to strike a balance between the gritty and the beautiful through juxtaposition, layering, and synthesis, often employing electronics alongside acoustic elements. Improvisations 1, a full-length album for double bass and electronics, is currently streaming on all platforms. In addition to the stage, Kyle's works can be heard in the video game Hold the Fort by Monster Tooth Studios, which is currently on Steam, and the short film The Autumn Waltz, currently on Amazon Prime. Kyle, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hello. Yeah, and if you watch that short film on Amazon Prime, you can hear Andre singing.
Woo!
Yeah.
Yeah, a youthful voice.
Youthful voice.
How many years ago was that?
That was like 6 years ago, I think.
Wow.
It was in my old apartment, and we've been here now for 4 years. So It had to have been like 6 years ago.
That's wild. Kyle, I've been asking this to the others, and we've had an insane year to say the least. But a lot of artists have handled it differently. I'm wondering how did you handle 2020? Was it creatively fruitful?
Not really, honestly. It was hard to write without without the prospect of performance, I think, for me. I did focus on like more of myself. So like that Improvisations 1 album was a thing that I did during quarantine. And then I made another like shorter EP called Ancillary Vestiges, which is also on streaming. It's also my Bandcamp. So I kind of focused more on like things that I could control and not think about writing a piece that may or may not be performed in maybe the next year or so. And it was just more of a looking inward. So it was hard to be creative. I found like I didn't buckle down and was able to focus on only making something.
But it still sounds like you got a lot out of it. You put out 2 albums. That's pretty good.
Yeah, that was fun. So that was fun to do, but that was like writing for myself and like performing and writing for myself and then putting that out rather than doing the composer thing of writing a piece and finding people to perform it. There was much less of that going on.
Well, the composer thing, have you always known that you were going to do the composer thing, or did it just kind of accidentally come to you?
Well, when I was in high school, I was in rock band in high school. And I was in band since 5th grade. I started out on the trumpet, actually.
I didn't know that.
I started on the trumpet, and then in 6th grade, I moved to the bass, which seems like a very logical jump. So I knew I always wanted to do something with music, and I was in a rock band, and then I just thought I was going to go into like audio production. So I went to community college for a year, and was studying that and realized that I didn't want to do that and I wanted to be more of the creative control. So I decided to go into composition, and then that felt right. And I've been in that sense. I made the switch in 2006 to composition, and then I've been studying it and doing it ever since then. So
the music that you write, it runs the gamut of styles, but you do work a lot with electronics. And did your first compositions include those electronic elements?
Not at all, no. My first compositions, like probably most people's first compositions, were not that great. It was just a lot of trying to figure it out, trying to find your voice, what you value in music. And that took a while for me to do, because like I said, I came to composition pretty late in the game. Like I started going to college for audio production, and then I switched over to composition. So I started in college writing, what we would call art music or classical music, whatever you want to call it. And so it was just figuring out how a clarinet works and what an oboe likes to do and those sorts of things. And then, as you learn more about that, you start writing better pieces. So I have a couple of pieces that I like from my undergrad, but I didn't get into electronics till I got to Hart in my master's degree, and took an electronics music class. I took one in my undergrad, like an intro to electronic music, where we learned about like digital performer, and so like, which I haven't really used since that class. So that exposed me to some of it, but I didn't really get into it until my master's degree, and I took a class, and then I decided to try and write a piece with it. And I wrote a piece, my first electroacoustic piece called Impinge, which was for bass and electronics, that I've performed several times. So I didn't get it. Yeah, I didn't get it until my graduate degrees, master's, first year of that. And then I got more and more into it. And then, I started focusing more on it because I enjoyed it a lot more. And it requires less forces to be performed, so it seemed very practical to me.
What are the advantages of electronic music? You just mentioned that it requires less forces, but are there other creative avenues that you can explore?
Yeah, I mean, you can, when you're writing, when you're writing for instruments, whatever those instruments are, like those are the sounds that you have to work with. It's like an artist and a color palette. If you can kind of compare it to that. So if you are writing for a single instrument, like a trumpet or a violin or something like that, then you only have a limited amount of colors to work with. Like it would be like Picasso's blue period, where everything's like shades of blue or something like that. So you're working with one sound. You can get a lot of different sounds out of it, but it's still a violin making those sounds. And then that expands to more instruments. You can get more sounds, but with electroacoustic music, you can do anything, and you can make any sound like a different sound. You can make a violin sound crazy. You can make it, so it definitely opens up a world of possibilities, sometimes overwhelmingly so. But I enjoy that aspect of it. And then you can have one instrument and electronics, and it can sound like a whole bunch of different things. You can have one person record many versions of themselves, so it sounds like a cello octet or something like that. Like I think David McBride wrote a piece for like 7 recorded cellos and a cellist, a live cellist, and so you can get that part out of it. So that was always very enticing to me. And then the immediate satisfaction of making an electronic, like a pre-recorded part of an electronic piece, and then having that and being able to hear it and knowing it's going to sound like that every time it's played. That's also very enticing. It's that immediate satisfaction,
Right.
that I like a lot. And I just get nerdy about like the processing of it.
Is there a certain element of the processing that you keep going back to, like a certain sound effect or a certain electronic component that you always use?
I don't think so. I use like Metasynth to create a lot of sounds, which you are somewhat familiar with,
Somewhat.
taking that class with me. Yeah. It's great for making sounds. But the thing that I really like is like thinking of an idea or like a process or an effect or a sound or something like that, and then figuring out how to make it happen. It's almost like puzzle problem solving. It's like a puzzle that needs to be solved. And so it's like, it becomes a little game to work with, and there's like no right way to do it. And it's like, how can you get it done? And so that's more of like the Max MSP side of it, of like, how do I get this thing to work in the way that I want it to do? So I enjoy that part of it as well.
Who do you find yourself listening to most these days? And maybe beyond that, can you think of a number of composers or musicians in general that have really influenced you in your writing? I know this is the hardest question. Give me a top 5.
Yeah, top 5. I don't know if I have a top 5. I like certain things about, I don't know, there's not really like a like a composer or a couple composers that like I, you know, I don't know how to word this. And I don't like model things after, but like there's lots of composers that I like elements of and that I try and incorporate that into.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like, let me think. It's like I don't write spectral music, but I really enjoy listening to spectral music.
Mm-hmm.
And so like Fausto Romatelli is like a new, he died early, but in terms of newer, like early 2000s spectral composer, but he incorporates a lot of rock music, like electric guitar into his music. So I like that part of it. Like Julia Wolf has some of that kind of rock stuff in there. Like I was in a rock band in high school, so I grew up listening to rock music, so that kind of speaks to me. But like, I also listened to a lot of Joseph Schwantner in my undergrad, especially. The piece Sparrows was really, really kind of seminal for me. Just that sound of those like open fifths and that sort of stuff. Do you know that piece very well?
I don't know very well, but I've listened to it on your recommendation.
Yeah, there we go. I actually have my little plaque in the Allen Library at the Hart School.
On that piece.
Yeah, for
Wow.
my years of service in the Allen Library. So that piece was really big because it kind of like opened up the idea of like tonality, but not tonality, if that makes sense. Like harmonies that could sound tonal, but that don't work tonally. And like just everything in between of that. So like that idea really stuck with me for a long time. But I don't know, there's so many people that I like, contemporaries of mine, colleagues of mine, people that are alive that, are, bigger than I am. Like Carl Stone is an influence as well. And what he does electronically, a lot of sample based music that he does. I don't know. And then I just listen to a lot of pop music as well. I teach a class in gender and popular music. So I listen to all the pop music that comes out so I can stay up to date. So I listen to a lot of, hip hop and pop and synth pop and rock and folk. The Punch Brothers are like one of my favorite bands ever. Chris Thiele is one of the greatest musicians alive. And so I listen to everything. I don't know. I try and take everything I like from it and then incorporate it into what I do, and it's usually some aspect of something or something that, catches my ear, or, makes me think about the music that it is and why it makes it that type of music instead of something else. I don't know how to describe it exactly.
Oh, it makes sense. I wonder, is there just to bounce off of that? Is there a composer who you really like, or a musician who you really like, really love the sound of, but you would never in a million years want to incorporate that kind of sound into your own music?
Oh, yeah, that's a really good question. So when I think about like incorporating things, I don't think about incorporating sounds or techniques really. I don't know how to, it's more of an abstract concept to me. So it's always about incorporating the things that I like about it. Like I said, I really love Fausto Romatelli, the composer. I would not write music like that probably. It's very, very spectral, microtonal, like, and that's not what I write, but I love the things that I love about it are that like he focuses so much on sounds of things rather than melodies per se. And, thinking about something besides melody and harmony or melody and chordal accompaniment or something like that, I think is really important, because it's like when you're listening to music, it's not only melody and it's not only, the chords that are built out of these lines. It's also timbre. It's also, tessitura. It's also like playing around with range. It's also, all those, everything combined. And then thinking about all of those as elements that you can work with in your music, I think is sort of like the next step of like control, if you want that type of control, but it's just like an awareness of what you're doing that I think becomes important. So like I wouldn't write spectral music, but I love spectral music for those reasons. I don't write minimal music, but I love minimal music because of the idea of sticking with a motive or a theme for much longer than one would otherwise, you know, and then really exploring it and then the minute differences from one part to another and how it kind of morphs over time, you know. So those sorts of things I like, but I wouldn't write that type of music, or I don't write that type of music, should I say.
So speaking of writing music, what do you do? What's your process like? Do you have like a set strategy for every piece? Do you constantly bounce around with different techniques?
Um, I have a pretty good strategy of how I approach a piece. I also hate starting pieces. It's my least favorite part about writing a piece is starting the piece, because I get so overwhelmed with the possibilities of what could happen in a piece of music. So I always try and limit those possibilities right off the bat. So I always know what instruments I'm writing for, usually, right? If somebody asks for you to write them a piece of music, you usually know what you're writing for. So the instrumentation gets chosen ahead of time. I usually decide on the length, even if that changes. You know, writing an 8-minute piece is way different than writing a 15-minute piece, is way different than writing a 4-minute piece. You know, in a 16-minute piece, you can incorporate more ideas if you want. In a 4-minute piece, you're probably going to stick with like one or two if you want, right? So the length, the instrumentation, I usually try and pick out like a mood um, ahead of time. Like if I want it to be like a ruckus piece or a more calm piece. Um, and so I like the instrumentation, the length, the mood, and then I need some sort of starting point, some sort of building block, and I get that inspiration wherever I can get it, because sometimes it's hard to get. So if it's, you know, if I'm writing a like a song or something like that, you know, you start with the text, and like the text will dictate a lot of things. So that can be inspiration. I try and get inspiration from the person I'm writing the piece for.
Hmm.
So like one of my pieces, Redline for saxophone and electronics, the guy I was writing it for used to play a lot of jazz. He plays less jazz now, but he did play a lot of jazz. Now he focuses mainly on classical, but I know that he could do the sort of like jazz tone that I really like in saxophone. And he would connect with something that were more jazzy. And this is not a jazzy piece, but knowing that, I took part of, you know, a part of a solo by Joshua Redman, who's a famous jazz saxophone player, like one measure of his solo, and then I sort of extrapolated out. So that was my starting point, right? And then I made a piece out of that, basically.
Hmm.
And, you know, it's like from that measure, I start writing the lines, and then as the lines develop, I kind of get the ideas for something else, and then that leads to an idea for something else. So then it can kind of snowball. Hopefully, it doesn't always, but you know, I need something to get the process going.
Do you find once you get started, and so you've done all this pre-planning, all this work beforehand, and then you have your that genesis of an idea. Does that idea, as it snowballs, affect your pre-planning ever, or do you stick to your original strategy?
I That's a yes and no. Yes, I would stick to it when I 5 years ago, I would say I'd probably stick to it. Now I don't stick to it as much. Um, I try and I try and make all these things so that I can have decisions to make.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then once I start writing, then I start to try and see what the piece is trying to be. Um, and then I can kind of throw that other stuff out the window. A little bit. Like the length is usually I stick around. I'm usually within a minute on either side in terms of length, a minute or two. So the length is always pretty close. The instrumentation obviously doesn't change if it's for something. Um, but I try and then have the piece take on its form. And so like I said, I hate starting a piece because of all the decisions that you have to make and all the possibilities that it could be. So my favorite part of the piece is like right in the middle where you have all of your ideas, and then it's just like you can start to think in your piece. Do you get that? Where like
Sort of writes itself, right? It gives you ideas based on all these different parameters that you've already come coalesced on.
exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I'm weary to say it writes itself because it's a lot of work.
I say that in the most general, the general sense of the
No,
word.
that's totally fine. It's still work and you still have to write it, but
Right.
like I am a bass player. I also played a lot of jazz growing up. And so, uh, improvisation is a large part of jazz. I do a lot of improvising, free improv. I have my CD of improvisations and electronics. So like I'm very comfortable improvising musically. And so when I get into like the middle part of writing a piece, and I kind of have like my ideas that I'm working with, my themes, my motives, whatever the piece happens to be at that point. And you can start to improvise within the parameters of your piece, like you're saying. That's my favorite part because then it's fun to like figure out where you're going to go with the constraints that you've given yourself. Um, so I try and get to that point where I'm in that middle part and then write the piece, and have it kind of take on its own form based on the music that I have. And so if if that means like scrapping an initial idea, I'm totally fine with that, to make the piece that it's supposed to be. So like I said, I start with a mood. And if like I start writing the piece and it's not that mood, I don't care. Like, so it's those sorts of decisions.
I've been thinking about a concept, and I want to bounce this off of you and see how you react to it. Especially, and I've always been thinking about this, but especially in 2020, this has really been at the forefront of my mind. Uh, is it more important for you to write music for the performer or the audience?
The performer. For me, I could see somebody saying the audience, and that's totally fine. But for me, it's for the performer and it's for myself. I think I'm probably pretty selfish when it comes to writing music, because I don't really care if the audience likes it. If they are, I'm thrilled if they are, like if they have nice things to say about it. But like for me, I'm trying to write a piece that I'm proud of, and I'm trying to write a piece that the performer enjoys playing. And the audience is almost like tertiary to that, right?
I'm with you because if the performer likes it, then it's out of your hands. Then it's there. If they really like it, then they will convey the message to the audience.
Exactly. If they enjoy playing it, the audience will most likely be more receptive to it. Even people that don't necessarily like that type of music that you're writing, whatever type of music you're writing, if they see a performer that's really into it, they're going to connect with that for sure, I think. And, it's just like there's so many people with so many different tastes in music. If someone doesn't like the piece that I wrote, that's fine with me, I would like if they liked it, but like,
That's the dream, huh?
for me, it's more about being proud of a piece of music and having the performer enjoy playing it, having it being well written for the instrument, musically interesting, whatever that may mean to you. So I don't really think about, oh, the audience is going to really like this part,
So I know your scores. I know the look of them, and they're beautiful and immaculately constructed and really clean. And as a notation person myself, I love notation. I wonder, do you think there's a connection between having a really good looking score, having a really clean notated score, and the music sounding good, or does it not matter at all, and that's just superficial?
No, it matters for sure. Absolutely. Because if it's, first of all, if it's notated very cleanly and looks good, it's going to be easier to read. People are going to take it more seriously. and they're going to put more into it because you've put more into the score, right? It shouldn't matter, but it does. It's like having a really good idea and then not knowing how to convey it with words. You know, we don't list like good speakers are eloquent and articulate, and our scores need to be the same thing, because basically we're telling them what to play
Right.
through the pages, right? You know, the score is sort of an abstract concept. It's the music. We write the music, and then we're saying, this is how you play that music, using a bunch of dots and lines and sort of that sort of stuff. So, you know, it does matter for sure. It matters for sure. Like, you know, we have done score calls together in the past, and when we see a score that's not made very well, you don't take it as seriously, which is unfair but true.
Right.
I think. And I tell my students that I teach a class on notation and finale, and I tell them that, like, if you are applying to score calls, having a better looking score is more important than having good sounding music to at least get you past that first step. Because, you know, there's so many scores to look at that they're going to go with what looks the best.
What kind of advice can you give an emerging composer or professional musician just starting out in the field?
I would say figure out what you want out of it first. Do you want to be successful? Do you want, like, whether that's commercial or artistically, you know, do you want to just try and be good at it? Like, you know, figure out what kind of your priorities are, and then just do it. Because like, just write and get your stuff out there in whatever avenue like would help you achieve that goal. Because like I said, there's a lot of people with a lot of different musical tastes, and almost like being quote unquote good is less important than doing it. You know, being out there, meeting people, getting your music played, because you're always going to get better at it, but like, you're gonna, like, it's just about doing it. It's not about perfecting it and then going out into the world. It's about getting out there, getting exposure, meeting people, and then getting hopefully getting better as you're doing it. But you know, it's not about being the best.
What's that whole 10,000 hours thing? Was that the Beatles? Right, that you have to
Was it?
perform. I can't remember who
I
said
mean, I
it.
know about it, but I don't know who said it. But yeah, it's the 10th. Like, I have been doing this for, what did I say, like 15 years now. And like, I still don't know what I'm doing. Like I said, whenever I start a piece, I'm like terrified because I don't know how to start a piece. So like, I give myself these parameters to do it. And like, I'm constantly, I'm still learning every time I write, every time I listen to music, you know, I'm still learning a lot. So you're not going to know it all right away, but like, what will help you career wise, if this is what you want a career out of it, is knowing people, getting out there, supporting performers, you know, making connections, getting your music played. And you will get better as you do that. But like, you can't sit at home and then think like, oh, this piece isn't good enough to be performed, the next piece will be good. And then, you know, years have gone by and nobody knows about your music because you are only writing it, you know, in your room. So I would say just do it and get it out in the world.
Do you have any cool projects going on right now? Are you writing anything exciting or not exciting? Are you writing anything right now? And where can we find your music? And one final question is, if we want to get into the music of Kyle Grimm, with what should we start?
Okay. Right now, not writing a lot. I had a lot of things canceled in 2020, like many of my colleagues and friends. So that was a bummer. I had several performances. I had a commission that I was supposed to travel and work on. All of them have been either canceled or postponed. So that's a bummer. You know, I'm I'm still always like improvising and playing with, my own electronics and stuff like that. But not really writing for anyone at the moment. Hopefully soon though. Hopefully as things start to open up and all those sorts of stuff. My music can be heard. I have my website, kylegrimmcomposer.com. Has all my music, has links to my SoundCloud. SoundCloud is Kyle Robert Grimm because Kyle Grimm was taken. Or my Bandcamp has my 2 albums on it, kylegrimm.bandcamp.com. What to start with? Well, like you said, I have a lot of different like styles, so it's kind of hard. Red Line is probably a piece I'm maybe most proud of at this point in my career. It's for saxophone and electronics. It was written for the Splice Institute a couple of years ago. Last year? I don't actually remember. 2018. No.
Okay.
Yeah, 2019.
So recent, relatively recent.
It is recent, yes. And that's like kind of, like I said, it's just like, it's one of my most recent pieces. And it's like, even then I was like, oh, this is what phrasing is. It's like, it's just like constantly learning about things. So that's a piece I'm really proud of. That is electronics. That's kind of like indicative of what I do most of the time. My albums on my Bandcamp or Spotify, any streaming service, are also a good starting point. They're kind of like long form improvisations of looping and live processing. I'm playing the bass. I made the patches and they're all performed live. So it's not like I'm playing and then like overdubbing like in a studio. They're all performed live in my room. But there's no editing that happens, only like mastering after the fact. So they're all performances. They're all improvisations, long form improvisations. And then if you want acoustic music, I wrote a song cycle for a group out in Pittsburgh called Camera Tone. It's called 4 Instances of Eliot. It's all very, very early T.S. Eliot, so it's public domain. So it's four songs for soprano, flute, clarinet, violin, cello, for a group out in there. So that'd be a good acoustic music start. Yeah, I think those are kind of the pieces. Actually, one of your former guests on this show, Aaron Wyansky, he was at the premiere of that piece, 4 Instances of Eliot, and he was like telling me about my music and how like it's progressed and how it's like come into like its own sort of thing, which was cool, like to hear, like because I'm too close to like, you're in it, you're too close to like kind of think about those things, but like so that's a good start for the acoustic music because it's kind of incorporating all the techniques that I've sort of worked on over the years in 4 very different songs. So I would say those kind of three pieces are good starting points for that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Kyle, for joining me today. I'll post links to all of the things that you just described in the description down below. Keep on tuning in every Wednesday. We'll have more composer spotlights. If you like this content, please think about liking, subscribing to the channel. If you have specific questions for the composers, please leave a comment down below, and I'll see you next time. Thanks again, Kyle.
Thank you, Andre.